Some months ago, a certain other Lord of the Rings-ish TV show prompted some fans to say, well, now we're really going to appreciate the Hobbit film trilogy, won't we? But after that certain other show ended, first season anyway, we actually saw little appreciation for the Hobbit film trilogy. Mostly, the Lord of the Rings fans wanted to criticize that certain other show. For my part, I never stopped appreciating the Hobbit films, though, but I do feel so alone in a company of dwarves who really seem to hate the Hobbit films. Today, our special guest returns for some friendly sparring about the trilogy, whose first film, The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey, released 10 years ago this week. Welcome back to the Wilder Lens of Fantastical Truth, the podcast from Lorehaven.com, in which we explore fantastical stories for God's glory and apply their meanings to the real world. I'm E. Stephen Burnett, Lorehaven's publisher and the co-author of the Pop Culture Parent. This is episode 141, 10 years after An Unexpected Journey. Must we really hate the Hobbit films? With our returning guest, Rilian of NarniaWeb. I'm running the show solo today, but if Zach were here, I'm guessing he'd say something about how he's going on an adventure, but he left his handkerchief back in the Hobbit hole. I think both of us have read The Hobbit. I've read it more recently because we did a book quest for that original J.R.R. Tolkien novel just a few months ago in the Lorehaven Guild. If you're a guild member by subscribing free at lorehaven.com, you can still find all that material there. Really fascinating book quest. Actually, come to think of it, I did not host it. That was Elijah David who hosted it. I just feel like I hosted it because I had a hand in writing some of the questions, and I've been blessed to lead a real life Hobbit book club. That was actually 10 years ago at my local church in central Kentucky. The first film, The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey, was releasing on December the 14th, 2012, actually, very long time ago. A couple of presidential administrations ago in the United States, certainly years before the pandemic lockdowns and a lot of other world upheaval. We had that new trilogy announced from Peter Jackson, the director of the masterpiece Lord of the Rings trilogy. And since then, some fans have had, I think at best, some mixed reactions to it. You are likely to hear those with our returning guest, Rilian. He's been on the show before. We'll get to his introduction in just a moment. First, however, let's stop by another fantastical world. That is that of our top sponsor, Oasis Family Media, whose fantasy novel Kelor by J.J. Fisher just released last week. This is book one of the Nightingale trilogy. What if you could edit memories with a single touch? The world that was is gone, lost to everything except a living memory, but remembering comes at a terrible price. 62 years after the apocalypse, a new society has emerged from the ashes of the old world, where highly valued memories are traded and nostalgia is worth dying and even killing for. Enslaved by a cruel master, Stephanie Winter is forced to use her rare ability to manipulate memories to numb the darkest secrets of the ruling aristocracy. You can get more information in our show notes for episode 141, or go to lorehaven.com/podcast sponsors for even more about Kelor. From there, I think that Rilian is arriving in the studio by means of some unknown fantastical conveyance. Let's throw open the doors and let him in from the cold winter. Rilian is just charged into battle atop his mighty Rohirrim steed, joined by a thundering legion of 6,000 Rohirrim soldiers. He is from the NarniaWeb Talking Beasts podcast. I've known him for quite some time. In fact, I actually started, I think my first several podcasts was actually joining them back when it was just the NarniaWeb podcast. That's how we met at the NarniaWeb forum back in the mid-2000s. Founded to help share Narnia news and notes, which was how his podcast got started. Now he's doing that same podcast so many years later with Glumpuddle, and it's known as Talking Beasts. By the way, another beast talked about Glumpuddle. I always like citing this quote when Rilian comes back for his holiday specials. It was screenwriter Stephen McFeely who actually co-wrote Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame and the Captain America movies. He apparently was caught on a hot mic saying, Glumpuddle, I have issues with you. So I think we're, 3 degrees of separation away from like the guy who's swimming around in his money from the
something
Marvel.
like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So big celebrity here. Talking Beast explores Narnia books and films. They have interviewed scholars and actors involved with the Narnia franchise or world one way or another, big Lewis people too, but also big actors like both Samuel West and Ben Barnes, who have both played King Caspian. And they got them onto the podcast to talk about Samuel West being Caspian in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader BBC special, and Ben Barnes, who is Caspian in the 2 later Narnia movies. In 2020, Rilian's been here before. That was his debut on Fantastical Truth. He joined us to lament, is fair, the Voyage of the Dawn Treader film, 10-year anniversary there. And then a year later, we had a lot more fun reminiscing about the Fellowship of the Ring film, its 20-year anniversary. By happy coincidence, we now have a 3rd anniversary for the Hobbit film, the first part anyway, The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, which released in December of 2012. 10 years ago, if you want to feel old. Rilian, do you remember how you saw that movie before we launched into our first chapter about what we thought about it and what we think about the Hobbit films altogether?
I watched it in theaters on an IMAX, and I don't know if this is the first time I saw it, but I found a theater that was doing because 3D was still a thing, and I don't even know if they did this with the other 2 films, but Peter Jackson said, well, I wanted this to debut in 3D HFR, high frame rate. So it's
right, 48 frames per second. Yes,
it's 48 frames a second. And so I thought, well, okay, I'll watch it that way. And it was next to Avatar in terms of the mind-blowing visual experience. It was unlike any. It was almost like watching a play. It was almost like watching a cutout.
So you didn't get the headaches that people reported. There was lots of complaints about the high frame rate and 3D, which, as far as I know, was still pretty experimental back then.
Yeah, and I don't even think he repeated it for the next 2.
He did though, because I saw the next 2 for the first time in the high frame rate. I think we went to the theater because we'd heard some mixed reports about it. I think we saw it opening night, not a midnight showing or anything like that, because we still had to work. But I think the first time we just saw it in the standard resolution, no 3D, no high frame rate, and so we just enjoyed it in the old style. And then we went back and saw it in the 3D.
My preferred viewing experience.
Okay, so you liked the old style of the Unexpected Journey better than the
I think what I did, I
3D.
think at one point I saw it in 3D standard frame rate, and I saw it in 3D HFR.
Oh, that would have been weird.
Yeah, I think I told people, if you see it in 3D, do not see it in the regular 3D, see it in the HFR.
Yeah, because the higher, the more frames per second,
it's a lot smoother.
But although a lot of people complain about that because they've been conditioned to think about the higher frame rate, to associate that with soap operas and inexpensive, play type performances on the BBC. But you didn't feel that way.
Not because it was in 3D.
Okay.
I think because it was in 3D. Yes, I like 24 frames per second. I'm a very old school guy.
Yeah, same.
I like 24 frames per second more than 30, and I like 30 more than 60. I like those old style movies because I don't like the smooth, the soap opera thing. And if I get a TV where it turns it on automatically, or it introduces artificial flames, I turn that off.
Interpolation, I think, is that, and that's artificial.
Interpolation,
it's not actually been.
It is artificial, and it does. I don't like it. I always try to turn it off. And anytime I buy a TV, I research beforehand to make sure I can turn it off.
Too. I think it was Christopher McQuarrie and Tom Cruise, I think, both recorded an ad saying, hey, if you get this in your TV, please turn it off. Like, this is not how you're supposed to watch the movie. It's going to throw off everything, look all janky.
Yes.
So we're in good company there. Yeah, that's the first thing I do. I don't know why the TVs, the HD or 4K TVs do that. I don't like it. Anyway, okay, so we're getting into some filmmaking geek stuff here, which is pretty hilarious given that I am not at all a filmmaker. Like, I don't even know how to edit movies on my computer. Please don't tell anybody that I'm not cool. But I feel pretty cool having tracked, unlike the Lord of the Rings film trilogy, which was tracked by the actual nerds who had read the books at their daddy's knee from the age of 4. I was not that person. I was the person who was scrambling to finish the book, which I knew was out there and knew was cool, but never read until right before I saw the movie. And I will defend myself. I did read it right before seeing the movie, but that wasn't enough to get my own images and expectations for the Fellowship of the Ring back in 2001. Which, as we mentioned in our last episode, Rilian, actually probably gave me an advantage where I could know the differences between book to film, but also was a lot easier to please. Now, with The Hobbit, I had a longer lead time, not only to have read the book much further in advance of the films, but then also to get my own images in mind and my own expectations for the book. Probably not as high as The Lord of the Rings, because The Hobbit does skew younger and is often, I
Yes.
think, falsely described as being the kids' one, whereas Lord of the Rings is the adults' one. And then the Silmarillion and all of the supportive material from Tolkien, like that's for the super highfalutin, very smart academical sorts. I think that everything is a lot more accessible across the ages than people give it credit for. All that aside, we had more time to track the development of the Hobbit films. So that's chapter one of our discussion here. How did we track the Hobbit films' development? Because soon after the Return of the King special edition came out in 2004, and then there was Narnia in 2005. Yeah, The Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, which we've talked about.
Dawn Treader in 2010.
That's right. But then, kind of all along, there was some fan movement.
Yes.
I remember a phrase. Wondering if you remember this. Let the Hobbit happen, or something. There was a website.
Yep.
Okay.
Let the Hobbit
What do
happen.
you remember? Maybe you're keeping up with this better, Noah.
Yeah, so Let the Hobbit Happen was a campaign, fan-led campaign that was really cool to see and probably had zero impact on the film
So unlike
coming out.
Release the Snyder Cat, cha-ching. Okay.
Yeah, I don't
still
think it really
remember
had,
it, though. I don't remember
yeah,
participating.
I don't think it really had much of an impact. Basically, I think it was just people trying to show, hey, look, there's support for this. Which, I mean, the studio's going to look at like, where can we make more money? So I don't think it made a difference, but there was, I think, a push because people realized the age of the actors was a factor, mainly for Ian McKellen, and they wanted Ian McKellen to play Gandalf, and Ian McKellen wanted to play Gandalf. He even Ian McKellen even said he liked playing Gandalf the Grey more than Gandalf the White.
Yes,
He thought Gandalf the Grey was more fun, less of a stick in the mud, I think was how he put it. But yes, Guillermo del Toro was picked eventually as the director, and Peter Jackson was going to produce it. And Peter Jackson, interestingly, said in his one interview, he said, "I can't direct The Hobbit."
I remember that.
He said, I've already done The Lord of the Rings. He said,
I would
The
feel
Hobbit,
like I'd have to top myself.
He said, if I have to top myself,
and he was right. He was very self-aware.
Competing with myself.
That's right.
He said, I said, I shouldn't be the one to do it. He goes, I want to produce it because I want it to get made, but I would love to be the producer and let someone else, make their vision of it.
Which is jolly sporting of him, by the way. And we'll talk about this later. I think Peter Jackson gets way too much criticism for how these 2 and then 3 films turned out. But I'll get to that in a moment. Let's just point out here, Sir Peter Jackson, for the win, trying to hold himself back because he knew that his megalomania needed some control from outside creatives.
And I think what people need to realize about Peter Jackson is he was someone who came along who loved these books and thought this would be such a cool movie. He was never a Tolkien scholar, a Tolkien purist, and honestly, maybe I'm a guy who's a filmmaker who loves The Lord of the Rings. Maybe that is the best person to make The Lord of the Rings, not a Tolkien scholar, right? Which I am not by any means. I know some, I think, but yeah. So as the project crept along, there was a lot of rights issues, and you probably have some more of the details kind of laid out in front of you.
MGM had a claim on the rights. That's all that I remember. I remember
there
was a
had
bunch
a claim
of stuff
on
with horses
distribution.
Yeah,
MGM had a claim, I think, on the distribution, and it came from some of the old cartoons and stuff that people had tried to do back in the day, like in the 70s or whatever. And so New Line and MGM were basically having to negotiate for who was going to produce and who was going to get rights and profit and all of that. And that's what bogged it down. And eventually they came to an agreement.
Right. And we were going to have 2 films originally, The Hobbit Part 1 and The Hobbit Part 2.
It was going to be The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, and The Hobbit There and Back Again.
That's right. Great titles, by the way, straight from the book. So you're showing honor for the book from the very get-go. And I think a lot of fans would not have complained if we'd gotten a 2-part film, because everyone thought, well, with the Lord of the Rings, each one of those books, the Fellowship of the Ring, the Two Towers, the Return of the King, each one consisting of 2 portions, like books within a book, and of course, all one story. It's kind of incorrectly referred to as a trilogy. It really is all one volume. The Hobbit is a much shorter volume, but I think everybody would have been okay if you split it up, because now you know that, hey, you could have done a Fellowship of the Ring Part 1, a Fellowship of the Ring Part 2, and you would have been able to maybe do some Tom Bombadil stuff, maybe
Yeah.
put more of the songs in there. And some of that early material seemed to indicate that they were going to be able to more faithfully represent the book in this
Yeah.
two-part film.
And I think people were a little optimistic. They thought, well, you could have each two-parter could be 2 hours long. It doesn't have to be a 6-hour deal.
Of course, yes.
And so th I think people were pretty optimistic about that, and they were optimistic about Guillermo del Toro. I Glumpuddle and I had talked about it. Glumpuddle loves Guillermo del Toro. If it weren't for one comment he's made about Narnia, he would have him direct Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Uh, but I think I'd seen Pan's Labyrinth, so I'd Guillermo del Toro, but or I'd seen that movie, so Glumpuddle. But yeah, I thought he was a good artist, and he seemed to be interested. But I eventually the project length became too much for him. He was
Oh, it
gonna
was
have
the
to like
development delays. He was
it
in
was
orbit all the time, unable to land
yes,
and actually start rolling cameras on this thing.
yes, and it was gonna be a long time, I think, for him and his family. It was gonna become like a 2-year production. So because of that, he eventually bowed out of the film, and eventually got to the point where the film was not going to get made if Peter Jackson didn't take the helm. And so I think reluctantly he decided, okay, I'll direct.
So do you think that that was a Peter Jackson, like, good guy Peter Jackson moment there? That despite his own misgivings, "Oh, no, I don't want to try to, top myself," then he just decided to go ahead and do it because otherwise we would have gotten no Hobbit films whatsoever?
Yeah, I think that's what it was. I think that he, at the end of the day, he's a filmmaker who wants to see the films made and love. I think he does love the source material, and mostly understands it, or at least surrounded himself with good people, good writers who understood it and came to understand it more through the writing process. But yeah, I think he was like, well, I'd like to see the film, even if I'm not ideally the person to direct it. Uh, and so he started doing it, and honestly, I think people correct me on this if I'm wrong because it's the internet. Production, I think, had already started when the studio then decided there's going to be 3 films.
That's
We're not going to do
correct.
2. There are going to be 3, and the first film was going to end basically when the dwarves arrive at Lake Town. Like the bit with Bard, where Bard is kind of the shadowy figure, pointing, drawing back an arrow at the dwarves. That was going to be the cliffhanging ending for part 1, and then the rest of the part 2 was going to have all of Lake Town and Smaug and Lonely Mountain.
So that would mean there would have been no, Thorin versus Azog, boss fight, in the burning forest with the wolves, or it would have been a much less climactic affair because that wouldn't have been the climax. The climax would have been the escape, from, the, Thranduil's realm, there in the woodland, getting out
Hmm.
of the dark forest, which frankly, that would have been a fantastic climax, and by the way, would have been more in keeping with the book because, as I
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, a lot of people wrongly presume that The Hobbit is the kids' book and The Lord of the Rings is the more grown up version for very grown up persons. Not so. The Hobbit actually has a midpoint, and it's right about there, actually, right before the
It,
dwarves come to Lake Town, where it starts
yeah.
becoming much more grown up and it's subverting expectations about the Arthurian legendary king who returns because Thorin, as Gandalf says later, does not make such a splendid figure for King Under the Mountain.
Yeah.
And you have those tropes being challenged within the story, not in this postmodern, gross way that there's no good parts of the legend, but just as a reminder that even a legendary king with grievances
Mhm.
like Thorin can fall for the dragon sickness. So
Yeah.
you get that in the film, but I think it would have been much neater of a divide if you had kind of this more whimsical part one of The Hobbit, whereas part two would have tonally, and this kind of shows up a little bit more in the trilogy, the film trilogy. But if it had been two films, then I think part two would have tonally matched the Fellowship of the Ring more. In fact, I think I remember hearing that when Del Toro was the director, that that was the idea that you'd go full on whimsy, a little bit closer to the slightly sillier tone of the book, which starts out a little goofier, a little more classically
Yeah.
fairy tale ish, and Tolkien's cracking wise. And then by the end, it hasn't lost its humor, but it has certainly taken a darker turn with a lot more politics going on than people give the Hobbit book credit for.
Well, and Bilbo has to grow up. I mean, it's the
Absolutely.
uh I kind of
Almost a
appreciated
coming
how
of late age story there for Bilbo Baggins.
12 More Rules for Life wasn't as good as the first book, 12 Rules for Life. However, it does mention the Hobbit, which makes it which is the
Oh, you get
plus.
points for that.
He
Okay,
gets
I've not
points
read
for that,
either.
but he had it's the go forth young man story, where Bilbo has to grow up. He has to he doesn't have to lose his innocence, but he does have to become wise. And he does have to become shrewd. And he does that. And he does this progressively through the story. And the uh as the if we're getting into the portion now, you wanted to actually discuss the merits of the film or films.
Oh yeah, that's just ahead.
But yeah, so it, it I think that overall that part was something I think Peter Jackson did understand. But yeah, I think overall I'm glad to have seen it, and I'm glad that he did decide to make the films.
Okay, there we go. So you're going to be a little more positive toward it. Now, some listeners, of course, not as positive about the Hobbit films. We're going to try to include and respect everybody, but I'm going to defend the films overall. But I'm also going to roll my eyes very hard at some frankly stupid moments in the movies. Each one stupider even than Arwen sticking her sword under Aragorn's chin in Fellowship and saying, "What's this? A ranger caught off his guard." Yes, even stupider than Legolas shield sledding down the steps in the Two Towers, and even stupider than the mountain of skulls that rain down inside the mountain as Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli are escaping in the
None of
extended
which
version of
age
Return of the
well.
King. No, none of them aged
None of
well at
those
all.
moments age well.
No, they were
Which is
just goofing
interesting.
off. People remember them because of the memes.
Yes.
But you can get the memes without having such weird moments like that. Anyway, you mentioned earlier, Rilian, that Bilbo Baggins has to have this kind of growing up experience, which also means that Bilbo has to be shrewd when going into the lair of Smaug, because Smaug has stolen his money and he's laying on them. Smaug is one dragon, but sometimes dragons have a better gift for you, as we learn in our second sponsor, The Gift of Dragons by author Rachel A. Greco. The fate of two species rests on the tip of a dagger. Ever since the Dindilians murdered her sister, Adelaide has plotted a rebellion to overthrow the king and prince who failed to protect them during the attack. Following her across the country is a stranger, not just any stranger, but the prince she's hoping to overthrow, and Adelaide's plans begin to collapse. But Prince Elias has his own dangerous secrets, secrets connected to the dragons that once lived in the land. If he can't earn Adelaide's trust, there may never be any peace for Adelaide, her people, or the dragons. There's an endorsement here from Kirkus Reviews. The way that the author uses dragons in her story is unusual and elevates the suspense. A well-crafted, entertaining plot. And by the way, if you want to see the Lorehaven review, we have that as well at lorehaven.com. You can find all those purchase links, including one to get a signed copy direct from the author at lorehaven.com/podcast sponsors, or go to the show notes for episode 141. All right, so Rilian, let's talk about The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, the first of now 3 films from director Peter Jackson and an all-star cast, released in December 2012. I have photos. I may actually put them in the show notes if I remember, of myself in line and other friends that we had in Lexington, Kentucky, at a theater that fortunately showed all of its movies in brighter colors than the rest of them. So I think if we went back there to see it in 3D high frame rate, some of the darkness was mitigated there when we saw it later. But in this case, we all got in line. This is back before you had reserved seating via apps for this theater. So you had to get in line to get a good seat. That's kind of dried up now because everybody
I remember
gets
when the
seats on
matinee
apps
was
now.
$4.50.
Right, yeah. We're so old. Well, son, I remember when it was black and white and you could barely have an air conditioning in there. It was a positive experience, I would say. I came out of the movie
Fine,
theater
you test out the
happy.
seat armrests first to see which ones weren't sticky, and you'd sit in
Oh,
those.
yeah. I mean, this was the good theater, though. When we went to see the Fellowship, Two Towers, and Return of the King, it was the little tiny one across the parking lot, and then they built this giant, stadium seating theater that just made you realize, wow, what have we been missing all along? And the little tiny one turned into the dollar theater. So a positive experience, not just because of the theater environment, but because I legitimately enjoyed the film. I had enjoyed the hype. I'd enjoyed, after all was said and done, the ups and downs of the development. I'd enjoyed all of the character posters that they released for all 13 of the dwarves. I had enjoyed the fact that they kept all 13 of the dwarves, which is madness. and decided to give them all personalities, even though some of them you barely hear from them in the film trilogy. But that's okay. You can't keep
Yeah.
that big of a cast for so long. Bilbo still needs to be the hero, and Thorin and Balin and some of the others need to come to the front. I especially enjoyed the fact that they had more time in this movie for the songs, because I'd got some
Yeah.
sneak preview of the soundtrack, and I'd heard the Blunt the Knife song, which is almost verbatim from Tolkien's original.
And it's executed perfectly.
Oh, it's so faithful to the book while still adding its own little unique spin.
And it works in the movie. They don't make it cheesy.
Right, not at all. They're earnest about it. You know, the dwarves are cutting up and belching, and some modern flourishes that is not drawing room fashion at all. As Tolkien said about the trolls later on in the book. I enjoyed the movie a lot, and I will still defend it as, I mean, not as good as the Lord of the Rings films, because what could possibly measure up? But it's still, I think, the best of the three Hobbit films.
100%.
Yeah, and a lot of the reason why it works so well is actually some of the reasons that were criticized by critics. Critics like, why are we taking so long in Bilbo's Hobbit hole? Like 40 minutes in until we're finally hopping the fence and going on an adventure. And what's with all these songs? And I'm thinking, you fool! Like, this is what fans came for, and Sir Peter Jackson and the creative team knows it.
I think that as I think about it's weird because I have to kind of segment. If I look at which film of the Hobbits, how do I rate each film, right? And then how do I look at it overall, right? Overall, it's a lot of negatives. Maybe almost overall negative because there's so many bad cringe moments.
Right. Well, especially in films 2 and 3, which we're going to get to in chapter 3.
Yeah, but for the first film, overall, I like it. I've sometimes like rewatched the first one without watching the other ones. And to an extent, I think, and Glenn Puddle, my friend on the Narnia podcast, he was much more critical of it. But my takeaway that he definitely accepted was he said, "Hey, what do you think? Like, did you really like it?" And I said, "I probably enjoyed watching it more than I enjoyed it." And he thought, okay, because I can accept that. And I think for me, it was so much seeing so much brought to life in such a good way. Not all of it, but seeing the conversations with Gandalf in this scene with Gandalf meeting Bilbo, seeing Martin Freeman's acting. Martin Freeman might be the single best cast.
Perfect cast.
Perfect out of all 6 films. Maybe out of all 6
really?
films.
Okay.
I think I can't
so even
think of anyone
over Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn.
I'm not a fan of his Aragorn, actually.
Oh, that's right. I remember. That's right. Yeah.
Yep.
It's the voice and some other things. Yeah.
Yep. But he's a great actor, but I'm just not a fan of his Aragorn. But there was so much that was good. My overall take was sort of like, now looking back, it's almost an inversion of the Lord of the Rings. Because I've sometimes thought, man, the Lord of the Rings it's my favorite movie probably of all time if I were to look at it as one movie. But there are some real cringe moments. There are just some dumb,
to which we've alluded.
Stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But then I've thought,
I don't know. Nervous system.
Yeah. The stuff that's the best summary of it was actually from Michael Ward, the author of Planet Narnia. I was talking to him one time about the Lord of the Rings. He's a friend of ours who hates the movies, loves the books, hates the movies, completely irrational. She said, she goes, Dr. Ward, do you actually like the movies? Do you like the movies? And he said, the Lord of the Rings films are flawed and marvelous.
Correct.
And I thought, that's a very good way. And even like 20 years later, they're flawed. They have real flaws, and they're still marvels to watch. And there's scenes that it just blows your mind away, even 20 years later. In the Hobbit films, it's almost the inversion of that. They're just you watching, you're like, okay, this is a really flawed film project with some moments that are just amazing to watch. There's just some moments where it's like, oh my goodness, this is so well done. But it's almost like the ratio is flipped. But not so with the Unexpected Journey. Unexpected Journey, I liked it. The first half is better than the second half.
Agreed.
But there is a lot there that I just love seeing, and I've gone back and rewatched not as often as Lord of the Rings. And it's really interesting when you get because of course they added, and they didn't change so much, but they added a lot. And I'm going to tell you right now, my experience on The Hobbit has been very tainted by a fan edit I watched that floated around the internet for a while before it was taken down. I don't know what happened to it, but
Which
I still
fan
have
edit
it.
is this?
It's
There's so
called
many I've seen.
there's our number. This one's called the M4 edit.
Okay.
And it is about 4 hours, 10 minutes long. And the nice thing about the M4 edit, the guy was a visual effects artist. So
Is
he
he the
not
one who
only
took out the son that
yes.
Bar the Bowman was
So for
firing his arrow
example,
from in
because I
film 3?
thought,
Okay.
well, yeah, because like jumping ahead just like very briefly. For example, I thought, oh man, I could edit the films. I could rip it because I've got video editing software. But I thought, man, but then like for example,
You have a lot
you
of
have
continuity
Bard
errors.
killing Smaug. Spoiler
Right.
alert. You know, Bard kills Smaug. Like, okay, well, either you include all the stupid backstory with his kid, which you don't want, or you gotta wonder, like, wait, who is this kid just showing up in the middle of nowhere? What's he doing here? And then it makes even less sense. This guy actually cut the kid out, like digitally removed
You
the
painted
child.
over him with boards and stuff.
He
right?
did, and I was watching the film, and I was like, I vaguely remember a child in this scene, and then I had to look into it because it's not obvious what he did. It works pretty well in this edit, but so I really like that version. And when I watched that, it's actually amazing how much it improves the film. My wife and I watched it, and we're like, "This is it's actually a good movie. Not great. It's actually good with all these edits and superfluous things just taken out." And the guy did as good a job as you could probably do. But so that's been my most recent viewing experience of the Hobbit.
Okay. Well, we not be endorsing piracy here on Lorehaven, but
I also own every single version. I own the entire
legally, yeah,
and I legally own the entire extended cut. So
yeah, we bought recently the entire Hobbit
saying.
trilogy with the 4K disc release. We got the Lord of the Rings last year, and we got the Hobbit this year. So we're going to be marathoning it and just taking an extra long time to go reheat our pizza when it's time for Tariel and Keeley to have their conversation about what's in his trousers or whatever. Gag me with a spork.
Oh my goodness.
Absolute bottom of the dwarven barrel foolishness there in film 2. But we're not talking about film 2 yet. That's right. I'm getting ahead of the Unexpected Journey. We're still trying to talk about the happier moments of Unexpected Journey. Really, and earlier you mentioned that a lot of the Unexpected Journey is faithful to the book, so much that you can, if you're a skilled editor and visual effects artist, and I presume got your hands in some sound editing software too, without access to the original score, that must take a lot of talent. You can pull out all the moments that are direct or arguably faithful to the book and leave out some of the other stuff they put in. Other stuff in An Unexpected Journey, like the aforementioned Azog boss fight. The film adds more tension to basically everything, and that's where the tone starts to change, a little bit more distant from the book. When you've got the dwarves talking about the orcs who are out there hunting for the dwarves as well as wolves. So it sets that up earlier. You've got orcs and wolves later on setting, the trees are on fire and everything at the end of the movie. That's from the book. Orcs hunt them, yes. Wolves hunt them, yes. But it happens a lot later in the book. They just back that up a lot earlier and then add this past between Azog, who's now alive, and who had killed Thorin's grandfather during the battle at the gates of Moria. So what did you think about that change, which probably represents most of what's added in the movie, apart from stuff with Radagast and other things that arguably are from Tolkien, even if not from the book?
So I'll tell you, when I was watching the first film in theaters, I'll just say I don't like Azog as a villain. I think it's unnecessary. You don't need it. And ultimately, it's not. There's different types of conflicts within stories, right? You can have a villain. You don't have to have a villain. I don't think that Crime and Punishment is the greatest novel of all time, but I completely understand why people say it is, because it might. Maybe I'm wrong. It might be. There is no villain. That the main character is trying to struggle against. It's a soul struggle. It's a spiritual struggle. And so I think Azog was completely unnecessary for a film like this. But what's funny, this film with the Battle of Moria, because of course I knew about the Battle at Moria and the fight and how Thorin got the name.
That's mentioned in the appendices. Yeah,
it's in the appendices. I knew about it. It was one of my favorite scenes of the film. I loved that scene. I thought it was so cool to see.
Oh, it is really cool.
Yeah. But you remember when you're in college and you write an essay, right? And you get a paragraph. You're like, this is maybe the best paragraph. And you know what? It needs to go. Because if I remove this great paragraph, the whole thing will flow better and it'll just work better as a final product. That's what that scene was.
Oh, I see.
Not the scene at the end, but the scene in the middle of the film. And it was like one of those things where like I loved seeing this, but it shouldn't have been in the film. And that was kind of my takeaway with some of the stuff they did. I will say one change that I was very early on sympathetic towards and kind of liked for the film early on more than a lot of fans was the leading man Thorin that they did.
Yes, that's
And I do
Richard
wish
Armitage.
they had tweaked his age a bit. They had done makeup versions where he's a little older, had a longer beard. They should have gone with that. But Richard Armitage was I think the best choice for Thorin. And
Oh, he was
I
fantastic.
I loved what he did with the character. And some people are like, oh yeah, it's just Dwarven Aragorn. I'm like, no, he's not. He
He's
plays a
100%.
very
He is a proto. He's like David compared with If Aragorn is like a
yes,
type of Christ, then Thorin is like a type of David, who is
yes,
a
and
good leader very mixed up
yes,
life choices.
yes, and a lot of actual great leaders are like that. If you look in the history books, you can find great military leaders. They have incredible qualities. They also have a lot of real flaws. We see it today in our CEOs. Think about famous CEOs like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk. They have real like, oh my goodness, that's not a normal person. There's a reason this person stands out and is doing incredible things, and they have real flaws. They're human beings. And I loved how Richard Armitage played Thorin. Um, and honestly, I thought the actor for Balin was fantastic.
Oh, he's
I thought
wonderful.
I thought
All the dwarves are fantastic.
they did a
Even the
great
young
job.
guys are okay too.
Yeah, they did I thought a great job with so much of the cast. Even like, what? Forget the Tariel romance. Feely Keely, give them real beards,
Right. Otherwise they look like
I,
junior Klingons.
they they do. They should have had longer beards, and like, what? Plenty of young guys have beards. That's okay. They could have had beards. But yeah, I think that there was so much positive that the first film did. Even with Azog was just a distraction. But even with the Azog being a distraction, I thought, well, the way that they played off Bilbo and Thorin with that conflict, I thought was still true to their characters.
Correct. Yeah, I think so.
And so, but here's the thing: there's a reason that someone can come along and edit out and basically make Azog a nameless character and just basically disappear the character, and it still works. When you make a film with a villain where you can do that too, you realize.
So the fan edit cut out the backstory for Azog, like he beheaded Thorin's grandfather.
He's
and
completely gone.
Really, completely gone.
Until
so there's no boss fight on the burning tree trunk?
He shows up at the very end of the third film.
Oh, okay.
He's the general leading the armies. That's all you see.
So that's more like the book then, where it's just some random.
Yes, he is a random orc leading the armies, and he has no name, and he does not show up on the burning trunk. And you know what? It's flawless.
Okay. Well, originally
they still burn the trees.
They
burn the trees. The wargs show up. The dwarves
you get on the trees and you jump off on the eagles.
Yeah. Yep. But Azog, you don't even see him, and
that totally works. Well, you can tell when you watch the end of the film, Unexpected Journey, you can tell that the boss fight with Thorin and Azog is a late development. And here's one reason you can tell, and this is very strange. In the soundtrack for An Unexpected Journey, the maestro, Howard Shore, back from Lord of the Rings, doing his musical continuity with the epic soundtrack of this project too. Very, very well done. The music in the soundtrack is different from the music in the film. The music in the film, it's epic, but if you are familiar with the Lord of the Rings soundtrack, it's also really infuriating because they are doing the theme for the Nazgul, for Thorin's boss fight with Azog. The Nazgul are nowhere near this story. This obviously is a temp track. If you're familiar with some complaints about movie directors, you stick some music in there in the editing process to try to help with the pacing and to make it feel more epic for you. And then you replace that with the original music by the actual film composer. In this case, they obviously got music from the Fellowship of the Ring and just kept it there.
I think it's technically the Sauron theme because it also plays in the prologue when Sauron.
It's the influence of Mordor, but specifically that's the Nazgul theme because you also hear it when they're flying around on their winged mounts.
Yes.
Yeah, and it doesn't belong there. And there's this other great music that's used in the soundtrack, which would have worked, but I think the reason why it got removed is because there was probably some editing. Probably some reshoots going on, and you just didn't have time to get the new music in there. That's just my theory. Haven't read that anywhere.
Well, I think if you listen to the commentary, so the final scene in An Unexpected Journey, that last scene.
I have watched all the commentary. It's just
The
so many hours of
I know
commentary.
it's a lot. It's a lot. You know, get that part of your life back, and you have to rewatch the films. But that that last scene was like a reshoot or a pickup because
That's right. Okay, so I
they
am getting that
needed to pick
somewhere.
up. They
Not just
needed to
making it up.
add. They wanted to add dialogue to Thorin and Bilbo. They wanted to give an arc. I thought it was unnecessary. It kind of came out of nowhere, especially because Thorin's a jerk again in the next film. But
Right. They kind
they
of tried
wanted
to buy it
Thorin
back a little bit,
to
Anakin
like
style. Yeah.
to basically say he was wrong about bringing Bilbo along. And that was something when they realized they were going to be cutting the film there. They wanted uh they wanted to have a little
We've got to
moment
have an arc high
between.
point. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Which also, well, it does help to alleviate a complaint that definitely recurs among fans for film 3, which we'll talk about in a moment. We really will. It's the complaint that Bilbo vanishes from the narrative. Like, it's all about Thorin, it's all about the dwarves and the elves and the fights and the politics. I argue that that actually is in keeping with the book. About whether or not they do it well in film 3, that's an issue for debate. But Bilbo does become just a member of an ensemble cast, arguably, by the end of the book. Here, they're actually amping up Bilbo's role. Thorin would have fallen in battle to Azog if Bilbo had not shown remarkable hobbity courage and jumped into the battle, which is something that hobbits do when their backs are against the wall. So it's in keeping with the personality of the hobbit on a journey with these larger than life fantasy heroes. And it also helps give Bilbo a little bit of a closure to that arc. Whether or not they undo it in film 2, by the end of film 1, Bilbo has earned his place among the dwarves. Maybe too early, and maybe he has to do it again, maybe even 2 times in the second film. But you can see at least where they're going with that. And that's what I kept thinking when I'm watching the behind the scenes for this movie, and to some extent the behind the scenes for the other two, is that you can see where they're going with that.
Yeah.
You can see some of what they were having to do is, act like Gromit in the second Wallace and Gromit short. You're throwing down the train track in front of the toy train to catch the penguin bandit. And that's sometimes just what making movies is like. And I respect that. And I also empathize with the cast and Peter Jackson being under so much stress. Peter Jackson throwing himself in as the last minute replacement director, and then having to go from 2 films to 3 in order to do more planning and catch probably. I don't know whether that was a studio mandate or what, but I won't pass up an opportunity to blame Warner Bros. For something else.
My understanding is it was a studio mandate. I don't know which studio.
I think it was Warner Bros. Because Warner Bros. Owned a New Line Cinema at that point, whereas before New Line Cinema was its own thing. So what do you know? We can blame Warner Bros. For the messier parts of the Hobbit trilogy and the DC movies. We can just blame them for all the things.
Everything. But yeah, but so much was stretched. I think that's why the visual effects suffered in the films, because they had to add so much stuff. And the visual effects in the Hobbit films, it's one of my big critiques. It's not as good. Now, there's another reason it's not as good.
They look glossier. It's because they have to do more with the computers. They can't use the miniatures anymore.
There's this
for the 3D.
There's this really great YouTube channel called Corridor Crew. It's these 3 visual effects artists, and they'll review films, and they'll point out, and they do a great job explaining why some films that are newer, like why is it that the costume in Black Panther doesn't look as realistic as the Black Panther costume in Civil War, which was earlier, they talk about like what happens in because there's just people, they can't just magically snap their fingers and it just looks
you've got
great.
time and planning, and you have to light the set a certain way, knowing when you're going to do it later.
I think with the Hobbit, everyone just thought, let's do it digitally.
We'll fix it in post. Yeah,
exactly.
They got rid of all the practical goblins in the cave scene when all the dwarves fall into the Goblin King's lair and replace them with the CG goblins, which look okay.
Because they also got rid of all the bigatures.
That's right.
Because they wanted to film in 3D. Yeah. If you can't film a bigature in 3D because your mind will immediately sense the scale of it, right?
Right. You have to simulate the 3D with the all digital environment.
So now there's
reasons and limitations for all this.
Right. And so it just it didn't look as good. The most realistic part of the entire trilogy was the first segment of the film with Bag End.
Right, which is all practical, and yet they're also doing it green screen and very careful practicing with the cast in order to put Gandalf in there with the dwarves.
Probably the best green screen ever.
It is absolutely seamless. I remember sitting there watching that in theaters and going and knowing that these are not actual little person actors. They're probably taller than Gandalf.
And Ian McKellen says he almost quit acting over that.
Yeah, and I remember. Do you remember the clickbait headlines about that? Ian McKellen almost quit The Hobbit. Rages at director. And then I remember seeing that and feeling kind of disappointed, but also trying to keep an open eye or an open mind. And then when we watched the BTS for The Hobbit, you saw the subversion of the clickbait because, yes,
Yeah.
Ian McKellen got very frustrated. It was very intricate to plan this out and hit your marks and talk to people who
Yeah.
weren't there, who were actually practicing in the other scaled set next door. And on the camera, there's a camera
It was
that's
just a
linked up to the
mentally
other camera.
stressful thing is what it
Sure,
was.
and it would be for
Yeah.
anyone, because it's all still very experimental. I think, what was it, 3 different, size placements, although Bilbo's, obviously one person among 13 dwarves in there. So, yeah, Ian McKellen, and they're confessing this all in the behind the scenes, so they're not hiding this. They're actually
Yeah.
being surprisingly open about the anguish of this, and then in the next bit, you see that they have got, Ian McKellen, his own wizard space, where when he needs to rest, when he needs to take 5, he can just retreat in there, and maybe that's where you see the meme picture of Gandalf on his MacBook. I think that's where it
Yeah.
came from.
I love
So
that.
you see in the behind the scenes where they made up, they reconciled. It was a
Yeah.
creative problem, and yet the clickbait ignored that and acted
Yeah.
like it was all some terrible disaster.
Yeah, I felt like, but it was one of those things I think probably realize now. The 3D didn't get them anything in the long run. You
No,
think,
not
okay,
really.
walking back,
Everybody had to
looking
do
back,
3D though. That was
yeah,
that was how you showed that you were well. That's what Avatar, Way of Water. I think they're going to do 3D showings. By the time this episode comes out, you faithful listener may have already seen it. I don't plan to. It's not my fandom. But hey, whatever floats your boat. Hey, get it? But that was the thing. You had to compete with the 3D movies because that was a thing back
right.
in the I guess the early 2010s. And so of course The Hobbit had to be in 3D. That was the big technical revolution back then.
Yeah, yeah, but so it's unfortunate that that little fad cost us some great visuals and maybe even some acting. But um, y- you know, the I think because I have the extended versions too, which
Yeah,
adds so
same.
little, so little. But I'm really glad that I still have the theatrical cut of Unexpected Journey because pretty much in every case the theatrical cut is superior.
Okay. Well, the one thing I remember is about part 2, where they add back the scene with Gandalf sneakily introducing all of the dwarves to Beorn,
Yes,
which
the
I
Beorn
wondered if they would
editions
do
were the
that.
only thing that was good
Yeah, well, that's the
about,
only thing I can
and
remember.
maybe
There's
even
some other
Mirkwood.
stuff, but
But
all right.
there's too much like with Lake Town nonsense.
Yeah, in movie 3, like, I think I'll just revert to the theatrical cut, except for Thorin's funeral. Anyway, in just a moment, yeah,
Yes.
let's go to chapter 3 there. Poor Mr. Baggins has to go through a lot of suffering, and fans would say that they too can share his pain while watching some of the Peter Jackson film trilogy. But that's nothing compared to the fate suffered by our main character in our third sponsor, the book Infernal Fall by Brian Timothy Mitchell. Despite falling into hell, Daniel Strong is alive. A demon coaxes him deeper and plans to take him to Satan. Hell and its many horrors weigh heavily on Daniel. His hopes decay, but the Holy Spirit remains with him. Will he give in to the darkness? Will he find his way home? Infernal Fall is a modern twist on Dante's Inferno. Grab your copy today and discover if there is a way out of hell. Looks like we've got 2 links here for paperback and ebook at Amazon, as well as an endorsement from same endorsers before, Kirkus Review. A remarkable cast of characters guides readers across a terrifying but compelling landscape. I can concur with that. If there isn't anything more terrifying or compelling than hell, I don't know what is. That's Infernal Fall by Brian Timothy Mitchell. So, really, in chapter 3, do fans really hate the Hobbit trilogy, or do we just hate parts 2 and 3? You see a lot of internet complaints about the Hobbit trilogy, but as I mentioned in the intro to this episode, a lot of people decided, thanks to that other Prime Lord of the Rings ish streaming show, which we shall not utter here. It's not too much. A lot of people said, "Well, we're going to really appreciate the Hobbit now." Sir Peter Jackson is still a fine, upstanding filmmaker, unlike these
Yeah.
bozos that just got here. Um, and yet afterwards, I didn't see a lot of clickbait videos saying why the Hobbit movies are actually great, like I was expecting to. I don't think I'm trying to fill that void because I, like you, have major complaints about films 2 and 3.
Yeah.
Probably, especially after the extended version of film 3, which adds this stupid, mindless R-rated slicing off troll limbs with the black blood
It's so
ice
weird.
sled
It's
scene.
like,
It's
where
just
did
out of
this come
nowhere.
from?
It's
Like,
complete
we're watching this
megalomania.
like, good grief, even the extended version of Fellowship of the Ring didn't have, because you learn behind the scenes, yeah, we have actually like an hour's worth of dialogue between Aragorn and Elrond at Gilrayan's memorial. You know, like
Do they seriously? I missed that part.
it's a lot. They said they have like a lot of stuff that they put in there that they just ended up cutting out.
Wow.
Even
So
the extended
there's
version, like they knew to not include
extended
everything.
edition. Oh,
They
no,
don't
of
even
course
they
not.
knew we're not going to include every single thing in the
Right,
extended
yeah.
version.
No, it's not
Just
like
got to
it's a
make it a
streaming
workable
drama
film.
where you have to pad out the
Yeah,
runtime or
yeah,
anything. So,
exactly.
yeah, but even at
But
least that is inexpensive
yeah,
dialogue
you,
exchange between two people. Here,
yeah.
you've got millions of dollars making the sled chase come to life and making jokes about the anatomy of trolls. And it's just stupid,
I
just
think,
mindless stuff. So
yeah,
I'm going to rant about that.
do fans hate the Hobbit trilogy? I know they hate parts of the parts.
I do.
They
I
hate
hate
parts
the
of parts 2
Tariel
and 3.
Keeley stuff. I cannot
Here's the
stand
thing
it.
though. I think even fans are like, "Oh, I hate it." Here's the thing, and this is like Glumpital was saying, "Oh no, I think the Rings of Power is better than the Hobbit." I'm like, "What? No, 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 no." Because and here was my argument to him.
Okay.
I
See, I
said,
have not heard that episode yet. Talking Beast, y'all were talking about it. I need to
"Yeah,
go
we
listen to
talked
that.
about Rings of Power, Rings of Prime."
Oh, you
Uh,
uttered it here. Okay. The black
so
speech.
Glumpital thought Rings of Prime was
Hear
better
it
than
in
the Hobbit
Bladris.
trilogy. Um, I don't believe it says it. I don't. I take a counter position to that, and my argument
Okay.
would be 10 years from now, I will rewatch the Hobbit trilogy, and I
Okay.
will, you know, argue about certain things of it, and say, yeah,
You'll
this
go
part was bad.
microwave your pizza for a long time
Yeah,
during that one
exactly.
part.
And I'll say,
Okay.
hey, we're gonna watch the extended version of Unexpected Journey, and we're not gonna watch the extended version for Battle of Five Armies. Or we'll watch a fan edit, right?
Or just
Maybe I'll
grab
just watch.
Thorin's funeral
Maybe
scene
I'll just
off of
watch a fan
YouTube or
edit.
something. Yeah,
Yeah.
for film 3.
So like we will rewatch the Hobbit films, not as often as Lord of the Rings, but we'll rewatch them. I will never rewatch season 1 of Rings of Prime. I just won't. What's the point? What am I going to get out of it the second time?
So you're a
But
bigot. Okay. There you go.
exactly.
Explode here. Cancel
They thought it
Rilian.
would be cool to do like hey, what if Eowyn was actually the leader of the Northern armies in Rings of Prime? And that's how they did the Rings of Prime show.
It was
But
also 10 times insufferable based on
but
all the clips I've seen. I've not watched it. If you're a Rings of Prime fan,
you know
hey,
what? Morphin
God
Clark is a
bless
very
you, but
good
I
actress.
can't.
Morphin Clark is a very good actress for
Could be a
Eowyn.
direction problem. Could sounded more to me like a writing problem. It sounded more like a writing problem. No
It's
fault on the
mostly
cast.
it's a writing problem. The cast is actually surprisingly good actors.
Mhm.
Surprisingly good.
Right. You can only do so much with the
It's
material
the
you're given.
creative minds behind it is the problem. But back to The Hobbit. I again, like there's a reason I rewatched The Unexpected Journey more than I have the other films. I don't just like, let's just rewatch Battle of Five Armies. Let's just rewatch.
See, I would
Death by
say An
Stone Squad.
Unexpected Journey was flawed but marvelous. But like you said, films 2 and 3 invert that. There's some marvelous moments in film 2, like Bilbo with Smaug, absolutely. Film 3 as well. Like, I mean, I don't mind parts of the battle.
Even
the
like
best parts, go ahead.
Yeah, well, even like the goodbye with Bilbo and Thorin.
I was just about to say that.
It's so well done.
It's
And it's just the
beautiful.
acting. The acting is
It's just two people.
so
Right.
realistic. But in some things, even there was some bits of dialogue that I still felt like they missed out. Like they have a line from Gandalf at the very end of Battle of Five Armies, where Gandalf says, remember Bilbo Baggins, you are only a little fellow in a wide world
After all, yeah.
And unfortunately, that line, it's a nice line, and it's memorable from the books. But the book, if you read the book, it's actually a much more profound statement, and it speaks to Tolkien's theology, really. Where what Gandalf actually says is, he basically says, because he knows about the ring, he says, "Do you really think that this was for?" This was all by your own luck.
You don't suppose all these adventures happen by chance. And
the movie all happened by
as being about the ring. He knows about the ring. He knows Bilbo's been using it to his advantage. But
he
the
says,
book,
you don't suppose it's all by chance for your own profit.
Right.
And he says, you need to remember, you are a little fellow in a wide world after all.
Right. It's a very overt nod toward Providence there.
It really is.
In the book version. Yeah.
It
so
really
it's a nuance
is.
missed by the film adaptation.
I wish they would have included that.
You got the words, you missed the meaning. Yeah.
Yeah,
which
they
is
could have.
A chronic failure of film adaptations for sure.
Yeah. But, no, there's so many. But even, I think it also speaks to something I talked about in Rings of Prime, one of the problems with the show, modern script writers, when they're adapting a lot of these books, when they don't have dialogue, that's one of the problems with Rings of Problem. They didn't have a lot of dialogue to work with. Um, they're very shaky territory. And what I think we see, if you look at all the Lord of the Rings films and the Hobbit films, um, that when they have a scene to adapt, say, and they want to go kind of create, it's like, hey, let's show something that we didn't really see fleshed out, right? Let's flesh this out, right? Let's expand on this from the books. When it's a visual element, like the Foundations of Stone with Gandalf fighting the Balrog as they're falling, it can blow your mind away. Or the prologue, right? Where they're showing something, they're fleshing something out that wasn't laid out in quite that detail, right? It can blow your mind away when it's something visual because they're very visually talented. And when it's like, you know what, let's pull out a lot more dialogue in this plot point, it starts to fall. It starts to cave. When they go in these entirely new directions, like with Tariel and stuff, it's just in Legolas, it's just like, what are you doing? But they can do a good job in the writing if they kind of keep it centered on something in the story. You know, probably the best little bit, one of my favorite bits of like just original dialogue writing in the whole Hobbit trilogy was where Bilbo tries to leave when they're in the mountains. They're going into the Misty Mountains, and
in the cave during the storm.
He's in the cave just before they're captured by the goblins. He's trying to escape, and I think it was Dory or Nori says, like, "Where are you going?" He says, "No, you're one of us." He says, "No, you're dwarves. You don't belong anywhere."
And he realizes the company now.
Yeah, he realizes he says, "You don't belong anywhere," and you can just see the hurt right in his eyes. And he says, "No, you're right. We don't belong anywhere." And it's just a great little moment where they let the actors do their thing and actually act. You know?
Yeah. It's not visual effects. It's not overwriting, and it's not dumb Hollywood stuff. I'll get to that in a second.
But it's the dumb visual effects and it's the overwriting that tanks the Hobbit films and I think that, you know, I almost have to put the Hobbit films, sadly, because we were talking about this on the Narnia podcast, like, hey, where are the Narnia films now? I said, you know what? No one's out there like rewatching the Narnia films. Let's rewatch every Narnia film once a year. You know, there are people who still like do Lord of the Rings marathons. I don't know too many people that do Hobbit marathons. I don't know too many people that are like, let's rewatch the Narnia films every year. I will rewatch the Narnia films, especially like the first two. I'm never going to rewatch Voyage of the Dawn Treader.
Because you are wise.
But I'll rewatch the BBC version. Come on. And I did.
It was fun. That rubber sea serpent can't be missed.
Yeah, I'll rewatch the BBC version. But
great drinking game.
And I will rewatch the Hobbit films once in a while. You know, I'll read the book to our kids, and we'll probably watch the Hobbit films. And they'll groan, and then I'll say, "Oh, but guess what? The Lord of the Rings film is actually good.
Yeah,
it's actually
that's
great."
Kind of the advantage to, like, I think my wife and I will watch maybe the Hobbit films once every 2 or 3 years, mainly just because we're completionists, but not such completionists that we're going to watch all of that dadgum ice sled chase where we're talking about the trolls berries or whatever. Oh, it's just terrible.
The great thing is that I'll read the book to our kids, show them the Hobbit films, and then we'll read the Lord of the Rings, and I'll say, but guess what? The Lord of the Rings films, it's actually better film, and the visual effects are better. So
so
improvement in every direction.
Exactly. So it's not like you're watching the prequel and it's so much better because it was made later. It actually works in reverse. So I don't mind watching the Hobbit films first. They are shorter. They are much more cartoony, and I don't mean that always in a good way, for sure. There's so much more interference there, and I may kind of end with this, and this is why, for my part, this is why I don't hate Peter Jackson. I may hate much of the Hobbit films, especially in parts 2 and 3.
Naked dwarves dancing around.
Thanks. No, I didn't want to remember that. Oh yeah, no, I appreciate that. I know
things like that. Like
that's in the extended version. Yeah, it's like partial fleeting nudity, and then suddenly, you're seeing like what? Oh, that better be prosthetic. That better be prosthetic. I think
they're all digital. I think that's how crazy it is. Like they did it all digitally. They weren't even that's why it looks so weird.
Okay, well then it's okay, Christians, if it's all digital, but at least they didn't get all those fine men down to their skivvies and less to show this stupid little sight gag. Yeah, so I hate that. I hate that in the first movie. I hate the Tariel Killy stuff in the second movie. I do not like it.
But even in the third film, even some of the stuff, like the way they made it too cheesy. But even the stuff, the acting from it was the actor for Thorn. We just said his name.
Richard Armitage.
Richard Armitage.
Right.
He did a great job, and Graham McTavish as Dwalin.
Yeah.
And
Oh, he's great.
He's so good. And the actor for Balin, I mean, I was like, these guys are so good.
Yeah,
And
even
they do
under
a
all that
great
makeup,
job.
latex. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what's funny
Even
is
the
like you read the
background
Lord of the
guys.
Rings, you get a better idea of the friendship between Bilbo and Balin from the Lord of the Rings than you do from the Hobbit.
Right. And that's
Because the friendship continued, right?
yeah. And that's put into
But
the Hobbit
it's
films where
put
it's
into
not
the
in the
Hobbit,
book.
and you realize,
Yeah. The
oh,
books, later books are informing the Hobbit adaptation, which is
like
something fans complain about, and I don't know why. I don't know why you complain that you show Gandalf and the other council members going to Dol Guldur to cast out the necromancer. That is
really?
from the
Because I don't like
books.
that.
Really, you don't? Okay.
Oh no, I
All right.
don't.
All right,
No,
so
I
let's
don't.
fight. Okay, yeah. So see, I like it because you explain where Gandalf went. Otherwise, it's just too book faithful. When Tolkien himself later said that Gandalf and the other council members went to Dol Guldur to cast out the necromancer. Like, okay, well, I kind of want to see that. It's kind of cool. It's really cool, I think.
I thought it was really cheesy. I thought they
Okay.
I thought it looked like
Well, it's kind of
bad graphics from a boy band. With the Nazgul.
Oh, well, the album cover where they all line up. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's pretty metal.
That's what I'm saying.
That is pretty metal.
Also, I'm pretty sure from the book it was more like an actual siege. Like Sauron brought like war machines. Saruman brought war machines. The Galadrim, came and fought. It was actually like a real battle, right? It wasn't just because they knew the necromancer was there. The question was like, oh, this is abandoned. Oh, he's hiding here secretly. He got an invisible army with a spell.
Right. Well, in this version, he sent out his armies to join the 5 armies. So are you actually complaining that Peter Jackson showed restraint and did not show this other giant battle?
No, I'm saying that's the way it happened. And so I also thought, I don't know, I kind of would have rather just been like more mysterious. And I think they could have done it if they just built up just how wizards are. Like wizards just like they will just show up.
So to preserve the mystique of Gandalf.
Yeah, they'll just show up and do the thing and then they'll leave. And I think that they like set it up enough to say, look, Gandalf actually like has other things and he's helping Thorin, but this isn't like his whole life's mission.
This is Gandalf's side quest. He's doing it for the extra XP, but it turns out to figure into the main quest.
I thought it could have been done better, and plus it also has so much cringe moments like the boy band and you should have stayed dead. I'm like, oh my goodness.
Well, that's just movie stuff. Yeah. But I like Elrond showing up. I do like the respect shown to Sir Christopher Lee, who by that point can barely move, but God bless him.
I thought that was cool.
Christian gentleman, and yet he's obviously a younger fighting man. For his
the only thing about that
scenes.
for the sake of the lore that I thought was really cool was where they don't have Galadriel armored up, which Rings of Prime would do, and they have
she's also OP, rightfully so.
The part where Galadriel she's actually tall. She's not 5'5" like in Rings of Prime, and she just effortlessly just picks up Gandalf, which the books don't say she can do that. But
you assume that she can because she's the oldest one there.
She probably could just pick up Gandalf if he had passed out.
Well, in the extended version, you actually see her. She comes on and this orc starts to attack her, and she just looks at him like, "What is this?" And then she just choom, and you don't even like it. It's the worst. It's not mechanical. Like there's no magic system there. It's just she is a powerful elf.
Yes,
she can do that.
I liked that a little more than like the
same thing with the banishment of
thing with Sauron and Gandalf is like, whose shield? Oh, I got some more hit points.
It's a total shonen anime battle there, which is probably why I actually liked it better than others. But oh man, we could go on about that. But it's a favorite scene of mine just because there's some Titanic good versus evil clashes there, and it's Benedict Cumberbatch is the voice of Sauron.
But for me, it's also the bit with I kind of have to think about again like the Battle of Moria was maybe the scene I enjoyed the most. Oh,
I see.
So I maybe enjoyed the most. I was like, it didn't belong in there.
Okay.
I love the Battle of Moria scene. I've rewatched it. Sometimes I just go on YouTube. I'm gonna watch the Battle of Moria scene. That was cool. But you know what? It shouldn't be in the film. So
okay, no, I see that. Now, the one thing I think that should not be in the film and shouldn't even be watched independently is the added boss battle versus Smaug at the end of film 2. That soured my experience of film 2.
Oh, where he's going through the whole.
This whole Rube Goldberg contraptions, and then they're riding around the mine carts, and it's just a total Lego video game.
It is like a video game. Unfortunately, too many film writers. They think, oh, how would this play in the video game? And like that's not how. Like no,
No, don't
don't do
think
the
about that. Now I know that they did
yeah.
that because of the reshuffling of 2 films into 3. You have to now
Yes,
give
you
that
have to.
film a bigger
Here's another
climax.
thing. So I will
They
say this:
think.
the biggest flaw with the any of the fan edits, so they like to cut that stuff out, right?
Mhm.
But when you watch that, the uh, you realize one, they cut out some dialogue from the book with Smaug and uh, Bilbo, which was a mistake
Oh, yeah,
because
no. You gotta keep
they
all
shouldn't
that.
have done it. But you also realize, oh, there's actually not a whole lot of Smaug in the film, and it's the biggest weakness when they do that because you're like, wait, he was barely here. It's very short from like him showing up to dying, and then you're like, wait, so what's going on now? That's one of the problems. I think that's it was a bad solution, but that was the problem that they had to find a way to tackle, and that was the wrong solution to it. But
Right.
it is a problem if you actually play out the film with just the dialogue. It's all the build up, especially because here's the other problem, right? Because you have 3 films. They made it 3 films. So then the percentage of time building up to this conflict is lengthened, and they shouldn't have done that. So that's one of the problems that they kind of created. Because you know what? You don't feel that way when you watch the old Hobbit cartoon.
Which I've never seen, actually. I've seen the
Oh, you
clips.
haven't?
No, I have not, and everybody see,
Dude,
you're
it's
about to do what
awesome. It was
everybody
like
does when I say I haven't
Golem
seen
is
the
a
Rankin Bass cartoon.
Golem is a German frog. The
Okay.
elves are like aliens.
Oh, charming.
Green elves are like literally
Hey,
green.
do they
like
have
alien
long
elves.
hair? Because I can't
Yeah,
do
they
elves
have
with
long
short
hair, but they're like
Okay.
aliens.
Actual elves, but they
And
look like aliens.
Smaug is a cat.
That I did see the clip there. Yeah,
But you know what?
with his
It's
headlight
actually,
eyes.
I loved it as a kid. I loved
Okay,
it.
see, I
And
never saw it as a kid, so I've missed my window. I will never have that
you
positive
you
association that
did
so many
miss
fans
it.
have.
You missed out big time. But you know what? It's actually probably one of the best pictures of Gandalf. Here's what I will say. Here's what you should do. You should go and watch the scene where on YouTube, it's all on YouTube, where Gandalf rescues the dwarves. I
Okay.
swear.
Wait, which time? Which time again?
All right.
Rescues the dwarves?
Sorry.
There's a
Where he
lot of
rescues the
them.
dwarves from the goblins.
Okay.
I
In the
swear,
cave
actually,
versus the
you
Goblin
watch
King.
that.
Okay.
The scene in the old Hobbit cartoon. This is one of my complaints with Unexpected Journey. The scene where Gandalf kills the goblin and the Goblin King and rescues the dwarves is actually cooler. And you're like, yeah, you're actually like almost wanting to cheer for Gandalf there. Whereas
that's a
it was a little
glitch in the
underwhelming the way they did it, and then it was kind of goofy with some stupid dialogue from the Goblin King.
Well, they're letting that guy just have too much fun with the character, and they obviously had a lot of respect for this comedian guy, this drag guy, whatever, who was doing the Goblin King,
that
and they
was
just
the problem.
let him run away with it.
Kind of like how it was.
Work.
Stephen Fry is a fantastic actor, but you know what? Don't make him a centerpiece of Desolation of Smaug. Don't make him a
right. Well, that's another glitch, by the way, that seemed to be a problem. Like, why in the world did Stephen or the Master of Lake Town's stupid greasy sidekick take over movie 3? That should have been the Master of Lake Town, even if you got him a bunch of dumb stuff to do, and then finally get eaten by a troll or whatever it was.
It was one of the
terrible.
weirdest. That's one of the weirdest directions.
Right. Well, I think I can explain that. They didn't explain that, but I think they had Stephen Fry down for one movie. I think that's what happened there. And then you have the conditions change. You've got 2 movies to 3, and now he's got to be in both. And like, I'm sorry, I've got to head back to England. Okay, well, we'll take this other guy that we cast as your sidekick, and he'll just inherit your mantle. Yeah. I don't like that at all. That's so dumb. Yeah. And plus, it's just overkill. Gold's bad, you guys. Greed is bad. Don't be greedy. Or if you do, then just snap out of it and lead the charge.
Again, things like that they just cut out pretty easily from those fan edits, and it was so easily done. In that they included all of the dragon sickness stuff with Thorin, except for the part for him sinking into the
CGI gold.
Cut that out, and it's like it still plays well. And so,
that's in the book. See, it almost seems like Tolkien got ahead of a modern screenwriter and says, "Oh, I'll make Tolkien fall into dragon sickness." It totally worked. Yeah,
when they're faithful to the books, it worked. And
right.
Sometimes they would discover it, sometimes they wouldn't. Like the best example was where they're like, you know what, we need to have Aragorn fighting Sauron at the end of Return of the King. It's not going to work otherwise. And then they film it, and they're watching it, and they're like, this completely takes away from the ring. It's like takes all the focus off the ring.
Yeah, they caught themselves. They caught Arwen shouldn't have gone to Helm's Deep. They caught themselves. Now in this case, they caught themselves with that dumb sled chase, and they cut it out of the theatrical release, as they should have. But then
I feel like
weirdly
this
they
movie
added
they're
it
like
back to the
catching themselves
extended.
like 5 years too late, and they're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, shoot,
Yeah,
well."
well, they should have caught themselves with the dumb stuff with too much of the making Smaug into a cartoon villain at the end of film 2. They should have cut the hints toward the love triangle stuff in film 2 as well, which by the way nobody wanted to do. I don't
No
think that's
one was
Peter
asking for
Jackson's
this.
fault.
No one
Except the
was asking
studio.
for it.
They basically seem to admit in the behind the scenes that this was a studio mandate because we've got to put something in there for the women, and women want romance, and it's kind of sexist, really. And it
Really.
wasn't fair to Evangeline Lilly because she's an actual fan of the Lord of the Rings books and films, and she didn't deserve that. And I think she actually said no love triangles. I don't put me in there just to be the girl for the boys to fight over. Like that's dumb. And I don't hate her character, but I don't like what they were made to do with her. And I will get Peter Jackson and co off the hook for that. I think the only thing you can blame him for is the dumb ice sled chase and the bloody limbs and all that dumb R-rated stuff. There should not be an R-rated Middle-earth movie, and I will die on that that mountain. I will die. Okay, so we don't really, we do not hate The Hobbit. We just hate parts of it. I don't.
It's hard because like I overall I would give like a, I don't know, B minus maybe to Unexpected Journey, and then it's like a C minus, and then like a D plus.
All right, so we're really confusing our international listeners here. B minus is a passing grade, just over a passing grade. D plus is like just past failure, but an F. So there is no E. An F is a failing grade in the American public school system.
It's and I mean the thing is like, I just won't. Okay, I'll put it like this: I will watch Unexpected Journey by itself. I will never sit down and just stop and just say, I'm not gonna. I don't need to necessarily see the other ones right now. I'll watch them some other time. If I will watch Desolation of Smaug and Battle of Five Armies if I'm doing a trilogy watch, and that's it. And I think at this point, I don't think I could stomach watching the extended version of Battle of Five Armies. I think I would probably do the extended version of the second one just because there's so much extra stuff with Bjorn.
Well, it's Gandalf with Beorn. Yeah, he's introducing the dwarves, and it's a genuinely good scene. It's very book faithful, even if it's out of order.
Yes. So I think that I would do that, but I've sometimes like I've rewatched just the Two Towers. I've watched just the Return of the King.
See, I can't do that. I my completion.
It's rare, but I have done it. I have done it.
Okay.
I don't typically do it, but I have done it like once or twice. But like if I want to rewatch something from Battle 5 Armies, I'm just gonna pull up the scene I want to watch on YouTube. Like,
I've watched the Dol Guldur attack a few times on YouTube just because it's like, really cool
I'm gonna
in
watch
isolation.
The scene where Thorin dies, and there were some great moments, like with the fact that they're willing to let Bilbo and Gandalf just sit there in silence for like a minute, with no dialogue.
Yeah, just that was artistically great.
Things like that, or like, I feel like we're just so well done. Even like the return of Bilbo. I didn't like the little. There's a sequel, guys. I think one of the flaws with it, even though Glumpedal and I had different takeaways, he was excited with Guillermo del Toro, and then once it became clear Peter Jackson was taking over and it was a 3-film project,
right?
He said, I wanted a Hobbit movie, not a Lord of the Rings prequel. And he was exactly right. And I think we all realized he just verbalized it very clearly. That's exactly what we got. We got a Lord of the Rings prequel, not a Hobbit adaptation. That's the problem with the Hobbit films, and that's why it's. I actually don't even rewatch the Lord of the Rings films because like you can get old. It's kind of nice to like let yourself get some distance, and then oh my goodness, this is so cool.
Right, at least a year apart. Yeah,
I'm rereading the book right now. I'm in the Return of the King right now. But it's such incredible books. But yeah, I think last time I rewatched The Hobbit was that fan edit. It was like 2 years ago and 3 years ago maybe, and I have no desire to rewatch it again anytime soon. I'll probably maybe the next year watch the Lord of the Rings films. It's hard because like with the kiddos, it's like hard to find that.
Oh yeah, especially if you got young kids. Yes.
Yeah, what we did was actually we did the commentaries because you can like watch the commentary and then like, oh, hey, you run in, grab the baby real quick, burp the
Right.
baby, or
Plus,
like,
you can
hey, I
fold
got
laundry while you're watching the
fold
commentary.
laundry,
You get something
you can
done.
like, get a snack or something. So you can do the commentaries with little kids and like, depending on the age, what they can see. But yeah, so yeah, I think at some point I'm being redundant if I just kind of keep harping on
Right. Well, we don't want to be redundant. Like, we don't want to pad things out with extra scenes,
Nope.
dialogue that's
Don't
corny,
need don't need
action
dialogue and
beats
monologues that's just
unnecessary.
unnecessary, repeating itself and
Yeah,
repeating
no,
itself and
no
repeating
love
itself.
triangles, no uber violence, no CGI naked dwarves in Rivendell. This just won't do at all. So yeah, we need to edit this one to theatrical length, which I really appreciate you coming back into Lorehaven Studios, Rilian, for the third in this incidental trilogy of having you over here for the Fantastical Truth holiday special. I think we may have run out of fantasy franchise anniversaries, but I'll find another excuse anyway to get you back here.
There you
Maybe
go.
even we vary the release time and have you over for summer and see if the audience dynamics will still support that. In conclusion, I think for me, yeah, I don't hate Peter Jackson. I do not hate the Hobbit films. I appreciate them for what they are. A very flawed project, more so than the Lord of the Rings films. There was a lot more expectations put on these by the studio, by the lawsuit with MGM. There was a whole thing about horses. There was a lot more clickbait titles. One fan theory I heard said that at this point, it was the Marvel Cinematic Universe that was the designated popular culture geek king. And there was only one occupant per throne per decade. And apparently, according to this theory, a lot of the nerd sites just didn't like The Hobbit or Peter Jackson coming back and saying, hey, folks, let's have another go around. It was all Marvel all the time. And it seemed to be some ruination of the story with all these corporate expectations. You've got to put in the silly bits. You've got to have the comic relief. You've got to have the love interest. You've got to have this. Why? That's the formula.
You need
And
to
of
create
course,
a product that will have a segment that caters to every audience,
right, which is
you know?
not what the Lord of the Rings films were. The Lord of the Rings films caught lightning in a bottle and were not
Yes.
only big budget, but were genuinely groundbreaking technically, with filming on location,
Letting an
a lot
unknown
of
guy have $300
unknown
million
actors.
dollars to do
Yeah,
film 3 films at
it was
once.
crazy. And so it was inevitable then that it gets a lot more commercialized for the sequel trilogy. And yet, based
Huh,
on
funny
all of
how that
those
happens.
limits, yeah, well, you're victim of your own success
Star
to
Wars,
some extent. Right.
Harry
So that's
Potter.
just, idolatry is going to happen. Good things can get twisted by human desires. That's just the way it is. And isn't this kind of a theme that's organic to Tolkien's worldview? As good things can get melted down and turned into, and then suddenly imbued with an evil from before the foundation of the world. That's just what happens. That's what happened to the Hobbit films. But personally, I don't hate them. I can, oh, what do I want to say here? I can love the sinner but hate the sin. And there's plenty of sins in here, but there's also a lot of common grace, which just fits with the whole idea here at Lorehaven 8. We discern and enjoy these fantastical stories, but I do want to get out of the rant mode. There is so much good in these films. I'm going to watch them again, probably a lot sooner than you really, and I'm going to enjoy them. But there's some parts that, yeah, I'm just going to hit the skip button. Entire scenes on my remote because some of it is just mega cringe. Let's just admit it.
Yeah.
Anyway, unless you got anything else, Rilian,
Nope.
yeah, where can folks find the Talking Beast podcast from NarniaWeb.com? Well, NarniaWeb.com, of course. Where else can they keep up
NarniaWeb.com.
with you?
You can find us. I know we're on Apple Podcasts. And you can find me on Twitter at Prince_Rilian. I'm semi-active on there. I try to keep my commentary mostly to entertainment, books, movies. Try to stay out of too many things, but sometimes I can't help myself.
That's
Uh,
probably wise. You are only a little fellow in the wide world after
I
all, and
am,
so
I
am
am,
I.
and as we were saying earlier, no one cares about my political opinions. That person does not exist. No one's going to be swayed by it. So I try to stay out of some of that stuff, but I do enjoy talking about art and culture and entertainment and literature. So,
All right. And of course, the Talking Beast podcast. Don't miss that. Subscribe to that right alongside Fantastical Truth. We'll put all those links in the show notes. Rilian, thanks again. Merry Christmas to you and yours, and further up and further in.
Merry Christmas and Happy Advent.
That is the third time I've gotten to catch up with Rilian, an old friend going way back to the NarniaWeb days. This may complete the trilogy, or maybe will be like the well-meaning Sir Peter Jackson and his creative team down in New Zealand, and stretch out this series far past its natural ending point. I don't make fun of all the multiple endings of The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, by the way. A story that epic deserves several different endings, especially when you have that scale with that level of an ensemble cast. But I wouldn't mind having Rilian back in here, maybe next Christmas. We'll see. I think there is another anniversary coming up. Speaking of The Return of the King, if we're doing an anniversary show in 2023, it would be for the ending of the Lord of the Rings trilogy 20 years ago in December of 2003. Anyway, lest we feel older than Gandalf the White himself, let's stop by our comm station for more notes about Christmas music. That was our last episode, 140. Zach and I just kicked back and talked about when we should start and stop listening to Christmas music and the debate over that. We also talked about our favorite songs, both sacred and secular, and of course, the songs that we love to roast over an open fire. And plenty of our listeners also like to roast these songs. They had some hot takes on Christmas music. We heard a lot about songs that people did like and some clarification about some stuff that we read on the podcast. But of course, being that we want to do some soft clickbait here, I think we're just going to emphasize the songs that everybody loves to hate. In the Guild, for example, Mr. Roboto, one of our heroes there in the Lorehaven Guild, we read his comments in the 140, and he wanted to clarify his position on one classic tune. He said, "My list mentioned on the podcast was for Christmas music written by Jewish people. I'd like to make it very clear that I do not endorse Santa Baby or approve of any version of this song." Similarly, Jeremiah Was a Bullfrog was the unfortunate choice of an Episcopal bishop for his investiture. He was easily persuaded that he could be relevant to the coffeehouse Christian set by having a folk guitarist play Stille Nacht and sing it in German. That's from Mr. Roboto. Okay, glad to know about Santa Baby. You know, we want to respect everybody's preferences to a point here. But although I think we can praise, I think the original artist of that song, believe it or not, is a rather famous Disney villainess. And if you know who that is, it's the same performer with a very grounded first name. Then let us know in the comments section, wherever you can find that. By the way, speaking of that song, fantasy author Catherine Jones Payne remarked on social media, "Santa Baby is the worst, and it's not close." I don't know if it's the worst. I still think there's some other songs here that annoy me more than Santa Baby. But yeah, I'm going to turn off the radio when it comes on. It's just a strange little song. On social media, too, Andy Sheehan observed, "Last Christmas by Wham! Is a violation of the Geneva Convention." Now you got to go bring politics into it, turning it into an international incident. But I think he's correct. Sarah Daniels on social media said, "Worst. And So This Is Christmas" by John Lennon. Hope it's okay to sing that because I'm making fun of it. It's a parody, right? On one of the most depressing songs ever. Best? Tough call, but I have to say for me, it's a split between the Christmas song by Nat King Cole and Christmas Time Is Here from the Charlie Brown Christmas special. I myself like to wait until Thanksgiving to play Christmas music. Otherwise, I get burnt out on it. I agree, Sarah. I usually don't like to start too early in November, certainly not as early as all those retailers that are making you poor retail workers suffer Christmas music the day after Halloween when you're trading the decorations out on the floor. But I do start a little bit earlier. I think the thing is, I just don't have Christmas music going all throughout the season. There are some days like today, I just haven't listened to any Christmas music at all. I'll just get enough, oddly enough, a podcast mode. And finally, Carl D. Swinson added, "Easy one. Santa Claus is Coming to Town" by Bruce Springsteen. Makes me cringe every time. Hey man, you guys all been good this year? Crowd response. Oh, that's not many. Yeah, when he's quoting that, I can hear it in my head, and I don't know why. I mean, I understand a lot of people like The Boss, but maybe it's just not my age demographic. But whenever that song comes on the radio, I am just intensely indifferent to it. I don't really understand, and I always end up asking, "What are you laughing at? Should this have been a music video?" Like, I don't see what's so funny. The guy can barely finish the song at one point because some other bandmate in the background or a performer or something is saying "ho ho ho ho," and I don't know what's so funny. Anyway, meanwhile, at Lorehaven, we have some serious stuff on the site going into the final month of 2022. We have Josiah DeGraff's article landed, and it's called "How to Discern Moral Christian Fiction Without Expecting Sermons." It's part of his Discerning Christian Fiction series. Really great article there, really great discussion starter, comparing our expectations for stories versus our expectations for a more didactic, straightforward teaching in sermons. So check that article out. We also had a review of actually our sponsor too for this episode, The Gift of Dragons. You can get all those links in the show notes. And we have a new review coming out this Friday. We have new reviews of Christian Made Fantasy every Friday at Lorehaven.com. That review is of Power Play, one of the YA superhero adventures from H.L. Burke. There's a member of our review team who's a big fan. Next on Fantastical Truth, well, we are preparing for the end of our 2022 podcast season. Between this year and the next, Zackary Russell and I are actually planning to enjoy a 2-week break from the show. But first, we should open one last present. We'll have one more episode of the 2022 season. What is inside? Is it a toy? One of those empty consumerist things we're supposed to joke about playing and breaking in one day before the kids start playing with the box? Of course not. If the kids break the toy, they would instead play with their smartphones, not a box. Yet, with all due respect for amazing toys, we'd like to talk about useful gifts we received, but still remember years later. In the words of C.S. Lewis's Father Christmas, which tools, not toys, at Christmas helped you grow as a person? That's our next topic on Fantastical Truth. Meanwhile, I don't know how you feel about the Hobbit films. I hope you read the book. Of course, the book is better, but the films are not all bad. I think that we err if we're trying to come up with the best way to roast the Hobbit films, like we roast Christmas songs. It's okay to roast Christmas songs, but the Hobbit films, just like weird Christmas songs, do have redemptive value to them. I think we should pay attention to that. We should thank God for that. We should respect the creators and the limits they were under. And altogether, we should have fun roasting or praising the films, which are, after all, mixed up just like the human heart, but are still capable of great good. That's helpful to remember in the world as we continue to seek and find Christ's fantastical truth.